across the world? Is it the new kid in the block that everyone is trying out?
I guess that it's an interesting way of putting it. I think certainly in terms of investors across the world, it's an area that they are very keen. There's a set of investors who are very keen in ensuring that the way the world does its financing, and increasingly at Standard Investment Bank, we are looking at sustainable financing, that it's done in the right way. If it's infrastructure, the infrastructure that is done is robust enough to withstand some of the challenges that we are seeing. We saw the floods which happened and roads being ran over. I mean, sustainable finance and sustainable infrastructure means looking at that infrastructure and ensuring that the way it's designed, the way it's constructed, it really thinks through about the challenges that could come through in terms of the vagaries of infrastructure, and also the way it's constructed, the materials which are used, if it's cement, it's low carbon cement, so impacting on the environment in the least possible way.
All right.
And there are very many other facets. If you think about, for example, energy generation, what sources of energy are we looking at? If you are looking at biodiversity restoration, if it's planting of trees, I think there was that holiday last year, but really this is all part of it. But it also includes, for example, restoration of mangroves. If you're talking about the sea level rising, how do you plant mangrove and ensure that the ocean is also well protected and cities in that area are well protected? So it covers almost the things which we've been having, but now really being a lot more thoughtful in the way we do them. And really, when you talk about a sovereign green framework, for that funding to be done, the funders also require more accountability from the governments receiving that financing. So when they provide that funding, they want to ensure that each year the government has a report of each type of project that has been included in that financing to ensure that there's accountability, that the money was used in the specific project, and that it ensures that it covers all the metrics that have been agreed upon.
Okay.
Yes.
And just looking at the elements of this, because essentially this is where the world of investment is going. Yes. Everyone is asking, okay, if I'm putting money somewhere, what is this money doing? Is it bettering the world or is it not? And also we are in an environment where the debt discussion is a huge one. So anytime we hear sort of a bond, especially in the local context, the most recent ones, the one we've been seeing, oversubscription, which, I mean, from an investment perspective, seems very safe to put your money there. The coupon rates have been so high. If we go down this issue of green bond now, being more specific in regards to what the money will do, is it sustainable or not? Compare locally, and now I know they're saying sovereign green bond, but is there that hunger in the market? Are investors asking for these avenues to put their money in?
I think when you step back and look at what's happening, even locally, when you think about certain specific sectors, if you're doing a real estate project today, that project, you need to find a way of it being green certified, which means, for example, if it's energy, you must minimize the amount of energy you're using. And in fact, it's even for your own good. We've seen people having solar installations on their buildings. And so when you think about that framework, it's really for our own good. We've seen banks having allocations of their fund, for financing green projects. So for real estate, for example, you're looking at energy, you are looking at the amount of water the building consumes, so you want to minimize that. You're looking at the way it's constructed, the low carbon cement. The same way when you're looking at government, one of the things they've done, and the debt, especially the big discussion, especially for foreign debt, the Eurobond that is due to be repaid this year in terms of just the $2 billion that has been subject to discussion. The government trying to think what other alternatives could there be. And in addition to that, also ensuring that people can be able to see this money has gone to finance this specific project. Remember, for the Eurobonds, the money was tapped from out there and it was mixed up with all the rest of the money, and it was spent, some of it on infrastructure, probably on investment. So you can't really see specifically how the money was spent. With a sovereign green bonds framework, or a green bond, that framework forces the government to go a step further in ensuring, in earmarking the specific projects which are going to be financed, and having very specific reporting mechanisms for each of the items, so that the funders, the people providing the funding, be it local investors or foreign investors, they can be able to see clearly where the money has gone and the outcomes which are coming. And the outcomes for people investing in these instruments is not just the financial return. They still need a financial return. Some of them might be comfortable with a lower financial return if the government achieves, for example, the social aspects of the project. And so it's that mixture that really provides attractiveness, but also it means the government has to put in a little bit more effort in ensuring that it can follow through with those challenges that are required to really be able to raise funds and commit to meeting those obligations over the life of the funding.
All right. And how competitive if this bond was floated today? Yeah, I know this is the framework of it.
Yeah.
How competitive are the rates? Because some people are also thinking, in as much as I want to fund or place my money in projects that add life to this earth, I'm also a business person. I need to get value for my money. So observing across the world, first of all, have there been jurisdictions where these bonds have been floated, even if locally if it has escaped my mind? And secondly, how competitive is it generally in the bonds market?
So obviously still depends on the projects you've selected, and those would probably also have to be rated in a way, and trying to figure out, do they also generate their own return? For the most part, you also want them to be able to generate their own return. And the way you structure it becomes very, very important in determining, what rate the government, for example, will pay for it. Because you could, for example, structure it in such a way that you mix the type of investors who are coming in. You could, for example, have typical your conventional commercial investors. You could also have other types of investors, multilateral lenders, who might be comfortable at providing slightly concessional rates. And then the assets themselves could also generate some return in themselves, depending on the way they are structured. I mean, you hear things about carbon markets and so forth. So, for example, if we give the example about trees, growing of trees, and if you're able to trade on the carbon that is generated out of those trees, because one of the objectives, for example, might be to plant trees, and over, let's say, 5-year period, if there's improvement, that improvement can be captured as a price, maybe through carbon credits, and actually sold. And when it is sold, it can be put back into this bucket and end up reducing the overall cost for government.
All right.
So it depends on the way it's structured, and just what other aspects could be brought in, and the type of investors. But ultimately, I think financing will go the sustainable way. There's a lot of push to really move, ensure that whatever we are doing in terms of financing, we think through a lot more clearly about the impact of that.
All right.
Yeah.
There was an agreement, was it in 2015, thereabout, regards to funding those people on the losing end, sort of Because, I mean, Africa contributes what percentage of the global emissions? Very
Yes.
minute.
Yes.
And initially, the big players, the biggest polluters in the world, were like, we're going to fund you guys so that you can be able to sort of offset that particular challenge that we're producing into the world. And some instruments were introduced, like you mentioned, the carbon credits and whatnot. But that funding issue has been quite a challenge. Initially, we were supposed to be getting almost $100 billion a year. That is the emerging markets and developing economies. That didn't happen. And there was sort of an erosion of trust. And I'm looking at this and us coming up with these alternative frameworks and instruments as sort of the other way to bypass, because the big boys are not doing their part. From the financial perspective, how are you interpreting this? How these two sides play?
I think they are still on track in a way. Mm-hmm. I think the issue is the level of commitment that would have been made by the countries in terms of just putting together the funds. When you hear the COP27, we had COP28 last year, these big discussions and debates. It's usually, that discussion about how as a world, how are we going to move forward from a financing perspective, who's going to bear the burden to some extent on climate adaptation, who's going to help maybe developing countries mitigate the climate risks that they are facing. And there are buckets of funds which are formed. But there are also criteria of the way you actually access those funds. So as a country, even in scenarios where those funds have been available, I really struggle to think about scenarios where we've actually been able to tap those markets, because you need an enabling environment because of that risk of greenwashing, for example, where you are not sure whether if it's selling carbon credits, how do you actually verify that somebody in Makueni has generated this number of carbon credits? So there's quite a bit of documentation that is usually required in order to verify and ensure that whatever you're generating, if it's carbon credits, there's a standard and they are kind of ring-fenced, and when they go to trade, it's seen as what you can say it's valuable in a way. Okay. So it's being able to read these regulations that are out there and being able to look at the standards which are available, and as a country to move forward step by step to ensure that we can adjust the way we are structured in our economy to be able to tap those funds. Right. Even though all the developed countries have also not committed the funds sufficiently, even the few resources which have been committed, it's been other countries, especially Asia, they've been very clever the way they structure and be able to tap into those funds. So I think it's also for us to look at our economy, how do we make those adjustments and have those standards in place so that we're able to tap into those funds.
All right. And some of these interventions, even as we come to an end, it's always geared on a very large scale. And I can understand it's because the government is the one handling this. But in regards to somebody who's seated at home, they're running their small business. They've been looking for funding here and there. They're getting all this talk. Noah is there on TV talking about, sustainable financing for the majority of our businesses, which fall under the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. How can these benefits that are accrued to sustainable financing and the interest that you are garnering trickle down to that level where Kenyans can see the tangible benefits, especially in matters credit?
In fact, that's exactly the reason you have investors very keen on ensuring that you identify the project. There's issues around diversity and inclusion. There are issues around the benefit of new technologies which are going to be passed on to the underlying, for example, if it's a farmer, being able to get affordable solar panels, affordable irrigation equipments which are able to minimize the use of water. So there are other ways of looking at it, but you need to structure it in such a way that you identify each project and you're able to figure out how the benefit is actually going to reach the underlying individual, as it were. But we've just not been able to walk that journey to be able to really see that benefit for consumers. It's really been few and far between projects which have been able to move that direction. But it's an area that is evolving, and funders are increasingly more focused. So when you're doing the project, increasingly there's that element of identification of the specific projects, how the benefits are going to be accrued, and even if it's trees, how do you pay carbon credits, however small an amount, to incentivize that small farmer there to actually get a small benefit. One needs to have very good ways of identifying each individual farmer, which farm are they based at, how many trees are they growing, how are the trees growing. If they grow by 1 feet in a year, you're able to know this is the amount of carbon they've taken, convert this into carbon, and these ones are traded and they generate money and you send the money back to them. But it's quite a bit of effort around that, and that's why the government does it on a big way, but it has to filter to the common mwananchi.
Definitely. Very, very important. Thank you very much, Eric Musau.
Thank you.
Head of Research at Standard Investment Bank, and helping us understand the dynamics around green financing and sustainable financing, and what this sovereign green bond framework actually portends for the market. So hopefully in the course of the year, we'll be able to see whether this framework is bearing fruit, tangible fruit, in regards to attracting those investors and being able to target those investments to specific areas that will better the world, will better Kenya as a whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Noah. It's a pleasure.
All right, there we go. Marta's Sovereign Green Bond Framework, right here on Business Today. We're going to take a short break. When you come back, we're still looking at matters greening the country, green economy, and some of the further interventions from the cabinet and what it portends for you and me as a Kenyan. Stay tuned.